I was trained to keep my distance, to follow protocol, to not see inmates as people. I knew the games they played, the manipulation, the mind tricks, the lies coated in charm. And I was good at it. Cold, composed, unreadable. Until the letters started. No name, no return address, just my name, first name only, handwritten. Always, Monday morning, left where only staff had access. The first one said, "You still keep chamomile tea in your top drawer. You don't drink it, but you like the smell, like your mother did." That stopped me cold. No one here knew about my mother. No one knew what she called me when I was little. No one knew the date she died, except me. And now, someone else. Each week, the letters got closer, sharper, more specific. The scar behind your knee from the fall at age 6. You wear blue on Thursdays when you're anxious. You didn't cry when he left. Not at the funeral, not even after, but you wanted to. Whoever wrote them was already inside the walls, inside my head. I started scanning every face in every cell, watching their hands, their eyes, waiting for one to slip up, but they never did. And then one morning, I opened the letter, and it said, "We used to know each other. You just don't remember me yet. But I've never forgotten you." Now I don't know who I am to them. A memory, a target, a confession waiting to be made. All I know is, I'm the guard, and one of them thinks they know me better than I know myself. And that's not just dangerous, that's personal.
Every morning began the same. Mara's alarm rang at 4:45 a.m., the shrill tone cutting through the heavy silence of her one-bedroom apartment like a blade. She always turned it off before the second ring, never allowing the sound to linger, never permitting disorder to creep in through the margins of her day. The apartment itself was a mirror of her routines, uncluttered, muted, functional, nothing ornamental, nothing spontaneous. Everything had a purpose, including the silence. Her boots were by the door, laces neatly tied. Her uniform, always pressed the night before, hung on the closet door, waiting like armor. She showered in exactly 12 minutes. She brewed a single cup of black coffee. No sugar, no cream. While the water ran in the sink for the dishes she never let pile up. Breakfast was 2 hard-boiled eggs and a slice of plain toast. She ate standing at the counter, eyes flicking occasionally to the muted morning news playing on the small television in the corner, even though she never really listened. The act was what mattered. Structure gave her control. Control gave her safety. By 5:30 a.m., she was in her car, driving the 22 miles of highway to Cold Ridge Correctional Facility. She took the same route every day, avoided the exit with the construction delay, and always arrived at the staff gate 15 minutes early. She liked being early. It gave her time to sit in her car, listen to the hum of the engine, and brace herself. The sight of the facility, gray walls under grayer skies, perimeter lights blinking in morning fog, never changed, but her reaction to it did. Some days it felt like a fortress, other days like a trap. Mara had been working at Cold Ridge for a little under 3 months, assigned to D Block, where the long-term inmates served out sentences that spanned decades. Murder, rape, organized crime. Her charges weren't petty thieves. These were men who had shaped their lives around destruction, men who had learned to speak in silence and manipulate through nuance. She had been warned not to let them see weakness. She never did. Her entrance into the facility was always the same. ID scanned, keys checked, radio clipped to her belt. Then the long walk through concrete halls to the briefing room. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The air was cold, too clean, a manufactured stillness that settled into your skin. In the morning briefings, she never spoke unless addressed. She listened, nodded, absorbed. The other guards, mostly men, mostly older, regarded her with a mixture of polite detachment and cautious skepticism. She wasn't new to corrections, but she was new here. And newness was a liability. Once on duty, she moved through the cell block like clockwork. Head count, inspections, monitoring rec time, watching for contraband, tension, eyes that lingered too long. The inmates noticed her, of course. They always noticed. A new guard was a shift in balance, a ripple in the monotonous waters of incarceration. But Mara gave them nothing to work with. Her expression was neutral, her voice even. She didn't joke. She didn't comfort. She issued commands, clearly and without inflection. And when she walked past a cell, she never looked long enough to invite connection. Still, she could feel it, the weight of their eyes, the slow calculation behind their stares. Every day followed the same rhythm, her boots hitting the same scuffed tiles, the same sounds echoing through metal bars, the clang of gates, the buzz of doors locking, the echo of voices in the yard. Even her thoughts followed a familiar path, looping through the checklist of responsibilities, never venturing into memory, never drifting into speculation. She kept her mind sharp, her presence professional, her interactions minimal. Cold Ridge was a place where routines could protect you, where predictability was a shield. When her shift ended at 4 p.m., she changed out of her uniform in the staff locker room, folding each piece precisely, storing it in her locker with ritualistic care. The drive home was quiet. She didn't listen to music. She didn't call anyone. She didn't stop for groceries unless it was Tuesday. At home, she changed into sweatpants and sat on the edge of her bed, decompressing in the quiet. Sometimes, she cooked a small dinner, chicken and rice, roasted vegetables, nothing indulgent. Other times, she ate a protein bar and called it a night. She rarely checked social media. Her accounts were still active, barely, but untouched. Friends from a life she had left behind sometimes posted updates, weddings, babies, vacations, but she didn't engage. There were too many parts of herself she had compartmentalized, too many names she no longer said out loud. Her phone buzzed occasionally with a reminder, an email from HR, a bank alert. Nothing personal, nothing unexpected. She kept her apartment clean, vacuumed twice a week, sheets changed every Sunday, fridge stocked with basics. No alcohol, no indulgence. On the bookshelf, a few paperbacks she never reread, a stack of correctional psychology journals, a single framed photo of her mother tucked beside the lamp where no one could see it but her. The TV was mostly for background noise. The couch was for sitting, not lounging. She didn't believe in comfort. Comfort dulled awareness, and awareness was what kept her safe. When she lay in bed at night, she stared at the ceiling, tracing the patterns in the plaster. She would fall asleep thinking about the next day's shift, about which inmates needed closer monitoring, about the incident last week in C Block, and whether it would ripple into hers. She never dreamed. Or at least, she never remembered the dreams. Sleep was a necessary shutdown, not a space for exploration. Her subconscious knew better than to wander. The routine was sacred. The structure was survival. Everything outside that rhythm, emotion, unpredictability, human connection, was risk. And Mara didn't take risks. Not anymore. Not after what happened 3 years ago in the last facility. Not after what she saw. What she lost. She had built this life like a fortress of steel and repetition. But what she didn't know, what no one could have known, was that someone else had already found the cracks in her foundation, that the routine she had so carefully constructed was about to be broken from the inside. And it would begin with a letter. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Not a remarkable Tuesday. Just another muted, overcast day at Cold Ridge Correctional Facility. The kind of day Mara had lived through dozens of times since she started her post, where the air felt both too still and too charged, and every voice in the block echoed just a little sharper than usual. Morning headcount was uneventful. A minor scuffle in the yard during rec time had been resolved quickly. No weapons, no paperwork. Lunch had passed without incident. By 1:30 p.m., the rhythm of the day was steady, predictable, controlled. Just the way she needed it. The letter was tucked into her personal cubby in the staff mailroom, sandwiched between a standard shift memo and a flyer about CPR certification renewals. It had no return address, no postage, just her name, written in uneven block letters on the front of a plain white envelope. Mara Nolan, nothing else, no title, no rank, no formalities. The paper felt oddly warm, as if it had just been placed there, though she had passed the mailroom hours earlier and it had been empty then. She paused, eyes narrowing, fingers tracing the edge of the flap. It wasn't the first time she'd received something in her cubby, birthday cards from the admin office, a forwarded note from HR. But something about this felt different. The lack of sender, the handwriting, the timing. She opened it in the locker room alone while the others were still at lunch or on rounds. The letter was typed, one sheet, centered, crisp, no heading, no signature, just a paragraph in a small serif font. And the words, those words, hit her like cold water down the spine. It began with a detail, small, intimate, something no one should know. The exact nickname her mother used to call her when Mara was a child. A soft string of syllables that hadn't been spoken aloud since her mother's death. The letter didn't reference it directly, just mentioned it in passing, almost tenderly, woven into a sentence about memories and masks, as if the writer knew it would catch her breath, as if they wanted to. Then came the second detail, the mug she used at work, blue ceramic chipped at the rim. It sat on her desk during her short breaks, filled with weak coffee or nothing at all, just there for comfort. The letter described it perfectly, not just the mug, but the way she held it, left hand on the handle, thumb tapping the rim absent-mindedly, when she was deep in thought. The detail wasn't threatening, it was observant, intimate, too intimate. By the third line, she felt the walls of her mind tighten. It wasn't just observation, it was study, surveillance. The letter spoke about her posture during shifts, her tendency to pause outside certain cells longer than others, the exact shade of eyeliner she used, though she wore barely any makeup. It referenced her habit of adjusting her watch strap every hour on the hour. Things that could only be known by someone who saw her often, watched her closely, thought about her more than anyone had a right to. No threats, no confessions, just recognition. A quiet declaration. I see you. She reread it twice, heart thudding so loud in her chest it muffled the hum of the overhead lights. Then she folded the letter neatly and slid it into her locker, behind a stack of uniform shirts hidden. Her first instinct was to alert someone, supervisor, security, anyone. But the absence of anything overtly dangerous made her hesitate. It was just a letter. A weird, unsettling one, sure, but not enough to raise alarms. And maybe, she told herself, it was a prank. A sick one. A test from one of the guards. Or one of the inmates who somehow had access. Maybe it was nothing. But, deep down, Mara knew better. She had spent her life studying behavior, learning how to read people from posture, tone, silence. This wasn't a prank. It was deliberate, controlled, personal. The writer didn't want to scare her. Not yet. They wanted her attention. They wanted her to know that they were watching, and that they knew her better than anyone else in that building ever had. She tried to carry on with the rest of her shift like normal. She ran checks, logged rounds, gave clear commands, but everything felt off-kilter. Each interaction now had a shadow behind it. Every inmate's glance lingered too long. Every voice felt like it held a secret. Even her co-workers' casual conversations grated against her nerves. Too loud, too intrusive. She found herself second-guessing everything. Was the envelope placed during her break? Was someone on staff involved? Had she mentioned that nickname to anyone by accident? She began reviewing the security protocols in her mind. Mailrooms weren't under constant surveillance. Staff cubbies were accessible by janitorial staff, admins, other officers. The locker room had a blind spot near the back row. There were too many access points, too many opportunities. And the idea that someone had taken one of those opportunities, to get that close, to speak in such a precise, eerie voice, gnawed at the back of her brain. After her shift, she drove home in silence, barely remembering the highway, the traffic, the turns. Once inside her apartment, she locked the door, then checked it again. Her fingers hovered over the keypad on her phone. She considered calling someone, an old colleague, a contact in internal affairs. But she didn't. There was no evidence, no context. And if this was what it felt like, a mind game, then acknowledging it might be exactly what the writer wanted. Instead, she sat at her kitchen table with the lights off and replayed her day. Every face, every hallway, every brief moment of eye contact. She had always prided herself on her detachment, her professionalism, her ability to keep the job at the perimeter of her emotional life, but now it had breached the walls, slipped through the cracks of her carefully constructed routines. The prison wasn't supposed to follow her home. It was supposed to stay locked away, behind bars and concrete and codes. But somehow, someone had carried a piece of it into her world, quietly, skillfully, and left it there like a calling card. That night she didn't sleep. Not truly. She lay in bed with the letter replaying in her mind, each word a whisper. She imagined scenarios. Who could have written it? Why? What they wanted. She checked her windows twice. She made sure her laptop camera was covered. She turned off her phone and placed it in another room, something she hadn't done in years. When dawn came, she dressed slower than usual. Every motion felt heavier. She stared at her reflection longer, wondering if something about her had changed, if the mask she wore at work had slipped without her noticing. When she arrived at the facility, everything looked the same. Same guards at the gate, same clipped greetings, same walk through the corridor. But Mara felt like she was moving through a world slightly altered. A reality in which the walls weren't just keeping danger in, but watching her from the inside out. The letter didn't come with a signature, but it didn't need one. Someone in that prison knew who she really was. Not the uniform, not the guard, not the woman who didn't flinch, didn't joke, didn't connect. They had seen something deeper, and they had written to her not as a stranger, but as someone already inside the walls of her mind. And now, no matter how tight she held to her routine, she knew it was broken. Because a routine only protects you when no one else knows its rhythm. And now someone did. The days that followed brought no more letters. Not in her cubby, not slipped under her locker door, not wedged into her car windshield or hidden in a coat pocket. But the silence didn't ease Mara's nerves. It sharpened them. The absence of contact made her feel as though something had gone underground, deeper, smarter. Like the game had moved to a level she could no longer see. She checked her cubby 3 times a day. She scanned her locker every morning. She reviewed hallway cameras in her free minutes under the guise of familiarizing herself with the latest maintenance shifts. Nothing. No footage of suspicious movement. No reports of inmates or staff lingering where they shouldn't. Still, something had shifted in her, and the shift didn't go unnoticed. She caught herself watching the inmates differently, with more suspicion, more alertness, more emotional distance than usual. Where she used to look at them and see profiles, charges, time served, behavioral records, now she saw potential suspects, candidates, faces behind the curtain. Her glances held just a fraction too long, and they noticed. Inmates who used to nod at her stopped making eye contact. A few gave her sideways glances when she passed their cells, lips tight, posture guarded. Something in the air between them had soured. The tension began to bleed into her interactions with the staff. She was more withdrawn, even for her. She skipped break room conversations. She refused casual debriefs. She ate lunch alone, facing the far corner of the cafeteria where she wouldn't be disturbed. People chalked it up to burnout. New officers often hit a wall a few months in, and Mara had already earned a reputation for being rigid, closed off, methodical. But there was something different now, an edge to her stillness, an electricity behind her eyes that made even the more seasoned officers keep their distance. She didn't correct them. The truth was harder to explain. What would she say? That someone was writing to her from the inside, dropping pieces of her life like breadcrumbs and then vanishing? That she felt watched every second of her shift, but couldn't prove it? She couldn't afford to sound paranoid. Not here. Not when perception was everything. At home, her routine started to fracture. She stopped preparing her lunch the night before, a ritual she had never skipped. Her laundry piled up. Dishes stayed in the sink for days. She slept with the bedroom door open, then closed, then open again, as if trying to find a version of reality that felt safe again. Nothing worked. Even her dreams betrayed her, cluttered with images of paper, ink, shadows moving just out of frame. She began waking with a pressure in her chest, like she'd spent the night bracing for something that never came. The second letter arrived on a Thursday. This time it was inside her locker, slipped between her uniform shirts, perfectly folded as if it belonged there. Her hands trembled as she opened it, though her face stayed still, unreadable. Like the first, it was typed, brief, clean. This one began with a single sentence. "You were right not to tell anyone." The air in the locker room seemed to vanish. She read it again. And again. The letter continued, describing the way she sat during her last shift, how her hand lingered over the hallway panic button during a routine perimeter check. It referenced the scar on the inside of her right wrist, the one no one should see beneath the long sleeves of her uniform. It asked her, softly, rhetorically, how many people knew about the scar. How many people had seen her take her sleeve down too fast, as if she'd forgotten it was visible. She couldn't breathe for a moment. The precision of it terrified her, more than any overt threat. There was no accusation, no warning, just a steady, quiet unraveling. Whoever this was, they had moved from observation to analysis. They weren't just watching, they were dissecting, understanding, mapping her patterns. The letter ended with a single line. "We all wear uniforms." She didn't report it, she didn't destroy it either. She folded it, placed it back in the envelope, and tucked it inside her boot while she finished dressing. Her instincts told her something deeper now. This was no prank. This was personal, designed. And if she was going to survive whatever was coming, she couldn't do it by following the same rules she'd always lived by. She started breaking them, quietly, subtly, in ways no one would notice at first. She altered her patrol routes ever so slightly, not enough to trigger a flag, but enough to pass certain cell blocks more often. She paused longer outside the cells of inmates who matched a certain psychological profile: withdrawn, manipulative, observant. She initiated unscheduled locker checks, reread disciplinary reports from the last 6 months, looking for inconsistencies, moments of access, names that appeared in unusual places. She cross-referenced visitors' logs and cafeteria schedules. Every piece of paper became a potential clue, every name a suspect. She kept her findings to herself, but not without cost. Her mind never rested. She'd lie awake thinking about the way the letter smelled faintly of bleach and something else, metallic like rust, about how the key to her locker stuck slightly more than usual, about the way one of the inmates in Block D had smiled too, long when she walked past as if he knew something. Her detachment began to crack. She snapped at a fellow guard during a routine report handoff. She forgot to submit a form, something she hadn't done once in the entire time she'd worked there. She missed a radio call during lunch, zoned out while reading incident reports for the 5th time in a row. She told herself it was temporary, that she could recalibrate once she knew who was behind this. But with every shift, the prison felt more like a maze, not of bars and walls, but of choices, each leading deeper into uncertainty. The walls began to close in further when she discovered her desk drawer slightly ajar during a night shift. Nothing was missing, nothing out of place. But she knew, with bone-deep certainty, that it had been opened. The drawer had a distinct sound when closed, a soft click she always listened for. And it wasn't closed all the way. There was no letter inside. No note. Just a shift. A message in absence. Whoever was playing this game had gotten bolder. They were inside her space, touching her things, erasing their footprints like professionals. Mara stopped thinking like a guard. She started thinking like a predator. She narrowed down her watch list to 5 inmates. All long-term. All highly intelligent. All with histories of manipulation, psychological warfare, or prior incidents involving staff. None had been directly near her in the last 2 weeks, but she didn't care. Whoever was doing this didn't need proximity. They needed access. Allies. They could be passing the letters through someone else, using one of the work detail crews or the kitchen staff as runners. She started cataloging every minor interaction. A glance here, A pause there. She kept a notebook in her car, writing notes with cryptic references that only she understood. But even as she tried to regain control, the foundation beneath her continued to erode. Her instincts, once sharp and reliable, now second-guessed everything. She began doubting people she had trusted, seeing suspicion in every glance. Even the mirror became foreign. Her reflection was too still, too controlled. It didn't feel like her anymore. She lost track of how many rules she had bent by the end of the month. She had stopped logging all her patrol routes. She had entered restricted areas under the pretense of security checks she hadn't been assigned. She had stolen time, deleted a portion of footage from a hallway camera that showed her staring too long at a particular cell. And worst of all, she had started talking to one of the inmates. Not interrogation, not accusation, just questions. Gentle, curious, out of place. The prison was no longer a job. It was a puzzle box, and the only way to solve it was to keep pulling until something snapped. She knew she was moving toward a line she wouldn't be able to return from. But rules were made for systems that worked. This one was broken. Someone had crawled into her mind, peeled back the layers she'd spent years fortifying, and left messages in the silence. And the longer it went on, the more she started to believe that maybe it hadn't started with the first letter at all. Maybe it had started long before that. Maybe the real question wasn't who was watching her. Maybe it was why she felt like a part of her had been waiting for someone too. It started with the sound. Not loud, not overt, just a soft click, almost imperceptible beneath the hum of the security lights. A subtle shift in the atmosphere of the locker room. Mara paused with one arm halfway into her jacket, her body freezing in that strange limbo between thought and instinct. The noise had come from behind her, near the far set of lockers reserved for the overnight shift, the ones usually empty during her hours. She turned slowly, heart thudding, not fast but deep, like something ancient knocking from the inside. There was nothing there. The row was empty. The silence returned. But it wasn't the same silence as before. It was heavier, expectant. Mara didn't move for several seconds, her body tense, ears straining for the echo of footsteps or the rustle of fabric. Nothing. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, like a door she didn't know existed had been opened just a crack. That was the first time she truly questioned whether she was alone in the facility when she thought she was. The next incident was more direct. Her apartment, always pristine, had subtle irregularities that no one else would have noticed. A kitchen drawer left open by half an inch. A faint smear on the bathroom mirror that hadn't been there before. Her toothbrush damp when she hadn't used it since morning. These were not signs of sloppy habits. She didn't have sloppy habits. Everything in her world was accounted for, monitored, maintained. And now something was slipping past her perimeter. She changed the locks. She installed a camera just above the doorframe, carefully positioned and hidden within a potted plant. She never watered but kept for aesthetics. She told no one. If this was a prank, a threat, a mind game, it was escalating. And if it wasn't, then she had already stepped beyond the boundary of anything a report could fix. At work, the intrusions multiplied. Her security badge failed. Once on the West Wing checkpoint, just for a second, just long enough to make her stop, swipe again, and feel watched from the upper railing. A document she had printed was missing when she returned to retrieve it. A clipboard in her office had notes written in her own handwriting that she didn't remember making, phrases that echoed the tone of the letters, cryptic, unsettling. The walls remember. You're not the only one counting days. Nothing stays locked forever. Then came the third letter. It wasn't hidden. It was placed directly on her chair atop the daily incident log, a silent dare. This one was different from the others. It was longer, structured like a story about a woman who wore a mask so convincingly that she forgot what her real face looked like. A woman who buried something in her past so deeply that it took another buried thing, another forgotten wound, to wake it up again. There were metaphors in the letter she didn't understand, or maybe didn't want to understand. References to echoes in the water, to the key in her pocket she's never used. It ended with a line that made her blood chill. I know what happened in room 213. Room 213 had been shut down for over a year. A supply closet now. Before that, a solitary holding room. Before that, a suicide. One she had helped clean up during her first month on the job. No one talked about it. No one had known she'd been there except two people. One had transferred to another facility. The other had died in an unrelated incident. That moment, those few minutes in that room, the body, the blood, the silence, was something she had never spoken of. Not even to herself. The letter had described it exactly. The line between her professional world and personal world dissolved entirely after that. There was no longer a home or a job. There was only the game, the infiltration. She didn't just feel watched. She felt known, disassembled, like someone had reached inside her and begun to rearrange the furniture of her mind. Her behaviors shifted accordingly. She stopped taking the same route to work. She removed every photo from her walls. She disconnected her personal phone and switched to a burner. At work, she wore her uniform with a double layer beneath, gloves, at all times hair braided and pinned with surgical precision. No identifiers, no loose threads. She watched everyone. Guards, inmates, administrators. She monitored security feeds even when she was off duty, hacking into the system using an outdated passcode left by a recently retired tech officer. She logged hours she wasn't being paid for, poring over visitor footage, listening to hours of hallway audio, rewinding conversations for tone and subtext. She wasn't looking for a person anymore. She was looking for a ghost in the machine. Her eyes changed too. They lost their softness, their occasional flickers of fatigue or human distraction. They became unblinking, calculating, cold. Even the inmates began to notice. One muttered robot under his breath when she passed, not knowing how close he was to the truth. She wasn't living anymore. She was surviving inside a maze of her own construction, and she couldn't tell if she was the one inside the walls or the one watching from above. The climax of the intrusion came in the form of a photograph. Left in her mailbox at home, an actual mailbox, not digital. No envelope. Just a single black and white image, her asleep in her bed. The angle was from the doorway, her form barely visible under the blanket, the shape of her shoulder exposed. The light from the hallway casting a faint glow across the sheets. There was no note, no caption. Just that. The implications of it didn't hit her all at once. They arrived in pieces. Someone had been inside. Not just near, not just watching. Inside. Close enough to hear her breath, to take the picture and leave without a sound. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She stood in the hallway of her apartment, holding the photo with both hands, perfectly still. The photo trembled before she did. She packed a bag that night, not to flee, but to be ready. She checked her weapon twice. She placed the camera footage from her door on a separate drive. She slept with the lights on. She reported nothing. And when she walked into work the next morning, she passed the same guards, the same inmates, the same hallways, but none of it looked the same. Because now she knew what the intrusion really meant. It wasn't about breaking in. It was about being let in. Somewhere, somehow, without even realizing it, she had opened the door herself. It began with the roster. Just a shift change on paper, something she'd seen 1,000 times before. The schedule was printed and pinned on the corkboard beside the main office like it always had been, but when Mara glanced at it, casually, without thought, her eyes snagged on a name that didn't belong. Or more precisely, one that hadn't belonged for almost a year. He was listed as a floater, a temporary backfill for an overnight post on C Block. Just one night, just one name. And yet that single detail cracked something wide open inside her. She hadn't thought about him in months, but now the past rushed in like a burst pipe. Because that name, his name, was the first thing she had, removed when she stepped into the role he once held. He was a guard, or had been. Quiet, observant, older than most of the crew. He hadn't been social, hadn't mingled in the break room or laughed at the morbid jokes others used to get through long shifts. But he'd watched, always watched, and he had taken an interest in her early on. Nothing overt, no harassment, nothing she could report, just a persistent awareness, a presence. When she passed through his post, he had always looked up, never with a smile, never with words, just acknowledgement, like he already knew her, like he'd already decided something about her before she opened her mouth. He had disappeared after an incident, not a dramatic one, no violence, no scandal. A mistake on a report that led to a disciplinary hearing, then medical leave, then silence. It was all unofficial, off record. But Mara had seen the footage. The mistake hadn't been a mistake. He'd let an inmate linger too long at a door. The excuse was technical failure. The reality was something else, something intentional. And the look in his eyes as he stood in that footage, watching, not reacting, it haunted her. She had chosen not to dig further then. She had been new, unsure, still trying to prove herself. She couldn't afford suspicion. But now, with everything unraveling, she saw his face on that roster and knew immediately. He was the thread, the one who had always been watching, the one who knew. By the time her shift ended that day, she wasn't just certain, she was consumed. She started going through old personnel files after hours, digging into archived reports that had been tagged confidential, requesting access codes under the guise of ongoing assessments. What she found disturbed her. Notes written in margins, questions asked during evaluations that veered too close to her own file, comments about her psychological profile, observations about her behavior, her discipline, her silence. He had been studying her. Long before the letters began, before she ever knew his name, she had been his subject. One file included a transcript, a therapy intake session, optional standard procedure after a use of force incident months before his resignation. He had refused counseling but had been required to undergo an initial assessment. In it, the clinician had noted a peculiar phrase he repeated twice. Some people forget, but the walls remember. The same line that appeared in one of the letters. That was the confirmation she needed. He wasn't just part of this. He was at the center of it. The question now wasn't if he knew. It was how much, and why. Her mind went back through every detail. The misplaced items, the camera glitches, the precision of the letters. Someone had intimate knowledge of the facility, of her, of the way she thought and moved. This wasn't inmate gossip, this wasn't coincidence. This was a calculated unraveling, one orchestrated by someone with both access and obsession. He had found a way back in, through the roster, through someone else's logins, through someone she trusted. She began watching the feeds differently now, not just for signs of tampering, but for patterns, timing, for anomalies in the routes other guards walked. She identified two colleagues who had overlapping contact with the areas the letters had appeared. One was newer, too eager. The other had been around too long and had too little ambition to draw attention. Both could be manipulated. Both could be compromised. She didn't confront them. Not yet. She just watched, waited, tracked behavior. Then came the fourth letter. This one wasn't hidden at all. It was left on her pillow at home under her badge. It was handwritten on a piece of standard facility report paper, folded in quarters. No envelope, no pretense. The handwriting was the same, careful and slanted, but the tone was different. It wasn't threatening. It was intimate. Too intimate. It began with a memory. Hers. Something no one could have known. A moment from her childhood, years before she joined corrections. A detail about the way she used to line up her pencils before tests to feel in control. It was something she'd never told anyone. Something that existed only in her own recollection. The letter spoke of this as if it had been witnessed, as if someone had been there. It asked her questions she didn't want to answer, not even To herself. Who are you when no one's watching? When did you start choosing silence over truth? What do you want from this place? Discipline or disappearance? It ended with a single line. You're not the only one hiding. The envelope it hadn't come in had still left a residue on the paper, faint but visible. She held it under the light, saw the imprint of something once pressed hard against the surface, a series of letters and numbers. She traced them with a pencil until they surfaced, an inmate ID. She ran it through the system. The file belonged to a man currently in long-term psychiatric isolation, not for violence, for persistent delusions. A man who had been part of a trial program 5 years, the same program that had ended when the former guard had volunteered to supervise its pilot phase. A connection, not overt, but enough. She checked the man's visitor logs. No one in the last 18 months. Prior to that, the only listed visitor had been redacted. She filed a formal request to unseal the record and received a denial within the hour. Too fast, too clean. Her instincts screamed at her. This wasn't just a rogue staff member, this was sanctioned, or at least protected. Someone high enough to hide records. Someone capable of pulling strings. She wasn't being watched. She was being tested. She drove back to the facility that night. No shift scheduled, no reason to be there. She didn't check in. She didn't use the main entrance. She parked near the East Wing and used an emergency access badge she had cloned during her last training seminar. The system didn't ping. She moved through the corridors like a shadow, bypassing cameras, stepping through blind spots she had, mapped months earlier. She stopped outside the old therapy room. Room 213, it had been repurposed, but the energy remained. She stood outside for several minutes, her hand hovering near the door. The keypad was lit. She keyed in an override. The door clicked open. Inside was a chair, a table, and a recorder. On the table was a single envelope. This time it was addressed to her real name, not Mara. The name she hadn't used in 15 years. The name she had buried when she joined the academy and reinvented herself. She didn't open it. Not yet. Because now she knew. He hadn't just been watching her. He had chosen her, not randomly, not accidentally, with purpose, with knowledge. He was building something around her, a maze, a mirror, a test. And now, she was at the center of it with no map, no allies, only the letter, and the eyes that had never stopped watching. She didn't sleep, not really. Her body collapsed into the bed at 4 a.m., but her mind was a raw red nerve, vibrating with thoughts too fast and fragmented to follow. Her fingers twitched against the sheets like she was still holding the envelope. The one addressed to her forgotten name, the one she still hadn't opened. Dawn didn't rise. It broke, cracked through the blinds like a knife between ribs. She got up in the dark like always, but everything felt different, off balance. Her routine, the one she built like armor, slipped at the seams. The toothbrush fell from her hand. Her shoelace snapped. Her badge, clipped to her belt, dragged like an anchor. The world had tilted and she was too proud to stagger. At the prison gate, the security guard looked at her twice. She was early. Too early. He buzzed her in with a pause. Her boots echoed in the hallway louder than usual. No one spoke to her. They had felt it. The shift. Maybe it was in her eyes. Maybe it was in the way her hands curled into fists when they should have stayed still. She didn't care. Something had fractured, and what slipped through the cracks wasn't just fury. It was certainty. Cold, clinical, unstoppable certainty. She stormed through the control corridor with a heat boiling under her skin like static before a lightning strike. No greetings, no nods, just a straight line to C block. Straight to him, the inmate, the one tied to the number on the last letter, the one who hadn't spoken to anyone in months, the one whose mouth had gone silent while the walls whispered, louder every day. She pulled the keys from the officer at the post without a word. He opened his mouth to stop her, then shut it again. Her stare cut deeper than a blade. She keyed the door. The bolt gave way with a scream of metal. The light inside was dim, flickering. The man on the cot barely moved, eyes wide, fixed to the ceiling. She didn't wait. She didn't speak. She crossed the room in 3 steps and slammed the envelope on his chest. His eyes twitched. He didn't reach for it. She shouted. The first time in years. Her voice cracked the walls. She asked him how he knew, who told him, why he had written what no one else could possibly know. Her words blurred into each other, venom and desperation fused. Her hands trembled, not with fear, with rage, with the unbearable pressure of too much silence, too many years of obedience, too much buried beneath a professional smile and a pressed uniform. He didn't answer. He smiled. A slow, strange curl of the mouth that didn't belong in a face so hollow, and then he turned his head, looked at the corner of the room. At nothing. And she knew. It wasn't him. Not just him. He was a mouthpiece. A conduit. Someone had been using him, guiding him, watching her through him. The breath left her lungs in a gasp that felt like drowning. She turned, staggered out of. The cell slammed the door behind her. Her vision pulsed white. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears like a warning drum. She sprinted through the corridor, past the med station, past the admin offices, straight to the server room, to the camera feeds. She burst in without knocking, startling the technician. Inside. He reached to stop her. She shoved him hard against the wall. Her badge didn't mean anything now, not to him, not to her. She logged into the system with a clearance level she wasn't supposed to have, one she'd kept from a supervisor who trusted her too much. She pulled the logs, the feed, the motion sensors. She found it. 2 weeks ago. A lapse. A technician accessing the system under her name after hours. A shadow moving through her office. A flash of a face in a corner camera. Not the inmate. Not staff. Someone who shouldn't exist in that space. Someone who looked exactly like him. Not the inmate. The guard. The one from the roster. The one who wasn't supposed to be here anymore. She froze. Every nerve in her body screamed. Her skin crawled, like it remembered being touched. Not by hands. By presence. By knowing. She turned. The technician was gone. Running to report her. It didn't matter. She grabbed the backup drive and walked straight into the warden's office. He was in a meeting. She didn't care. She dropped the drive on his desk like it was a weapon, told him everything, all of it. Every letter, every shadow, every piece of proof. She didn't cry. Her voice didn't shake. She was a bullet, fast, straight, inevitable. But when she finished, he didn't look shocked. He looked tired, and then he said the words that shattered her. "We've been concerned about you." He didn't believe her. No one did. She was removed from duty that afternoon. Not suspended. Not fired. Temporarily relieved pending evaluation. She was escorted out of the building like a threat. Her badge confiscated. Her access revoked. The same hallways that once echoed with her boots now echoed with silence. Doors closed behind her like the end of a sentence. Like a coffin. They called. It burnout. They said she needed rest. Distance. Time to recalibrate. They didn't say trauma. They didn't say betrayal. They didn't say we let you down. They didn't say his name. That night, she sat in her apartment. The walls too white. The room too quiet. She opened the last letter. Not to read it. She already knew what it said. But to feel the paper. The ink. The evidence. Her name, her real name, was written with such calm. She hadn't lost her mind. She had been broken on purpose. By someone who knew how. By someone inside. And now that she was out, pushed aside, dismissed, disarmed, she had nothing to lose. And some people, once stripped of everything, become more dangerous than anyone ever expected.